Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about that Georgia-Tennessee game, a huge one down there in Athens, Georgia. I am going to pick Georgia to win. I'm going to pick the backup against the wall dogs. I don't feel great about it. I'll be totally honest with you, but I'm going to go with Kirby Smart. I'm going to make them prove to me that this is not a normal Georgia team. So we'll see what happens there, but let's get into this big noon controversy. We will get into a couple more games right after this, but there's been a really interesting thing going on around the college football world over the last couple of days, and there's been quite a bit of anger up there in the Big Ten country. So let's get into this. And big noon kickoff. You know about it. You've heard about it. You've seen it a lot of the time. It is Fox's big time, college football pregame show, and then obviously the noon kick has become kind of the main slot for Fox and really the Big Ten over the last couple of years. So you've seen big time games. You've seen Ohio State, Penn State on there a number of times. We'll see Ohio State, Indiana in a couple of weeks. We saw Ohio State, Penn State a couple weeks back, and we'll see Ohio State, Michigan in a couple of weeks here. So obviously it is the marquee game in the Big Ten, and Big Ten fans seem to not like that very much. And it really started when Ohio State, Penn State were forced to play at noon, and the whiteout for Penn State was have to move to another slot, and that was against Washington. In that game last week, they had to play at nighttime for the whiteout. Problem was, it was on Peacock, and no disrespect to Peacock, no disrespect to NBC, the presentation left a lot to be desired. It was not quite that you're watching the whiteout, here it all is in all of its glory type of feel that you'd love to see from a whiteout production. So nothing against NBC, is just to say you're on Peacock for the whiteout doesn't quite feel right if you're a college football fan, especially if you're a Penn State fan. So that's where all of this kind of started. And then you had Ohio State kind of get in on the party. And that was what happened really this past weekend when you had Ohio State, Indiana was announced to be that noon game. You had a lot of people get a little bit upset. And it really is just more than half of the games that Ohio State will play this year are at noon, and I think their entire back half of their schedule will be at noon. So a little bit different for one of the best teams in the country, one of the biggest brands, one of the most talented teams in the country. Not playing night games is a little bit weird. The other part of this that does need to be kind of factored in here is Oregon can't play noon games pretty much all year. They can't play noon games because it's too darn early. They're not going to kick off at 9 a.m. over there in Eugene, Oregon, so you can't do it for Washington. So you can't do it for USC, and you can't do it for UCLA. That has created a little bit of a problem where it's pretty much Ohio State, Penn State, and that's about it. Indiana has helped out a little bit this year. Michigan has not. So it's been a little bit of a battle back and forth, and it also begun a little bit because, I wanted to get to a little bit different of a picture, but at the end of the day, it has begun in that different type of way because Utah, Colorado is in Boulder this weekend. It is the big noon kickoff at 10 a.m., which sounds absolutely crazy. I think it is a very bad idea, but as of right now, that is the way it's going to go down, and we'll see how all of that unfolds. Maybe that's a reason to go for Utah in that game. But at the end of the day, it is going to be really interesting to watch this. And the big problem with this isn't necessarily that noon kickoffs or, terrible or the worst thing that's ever happened, although some Penn State fans would tell you that. It's just to say, these are huge recruiting weekends. We're getting into a stretch of the season where you have huge games, huge conference games, and you have an ability to get some kids that you really want on your team to campus, have them have the full experience, really enjoy their time. A kid playing a game on a Friday night has to get all the way to a college campus at noon for a noon kickoff, has to get, say, to State College or Columbus, Ohio, coming from even Cincinnati, Ohio. It is a lot to do, and it doesn't give you that full weekend of recruiting. It doesn't give you that full experience that you would have at other universities like LSU, like Alabama, like Georgia. This upcoming weekend, they're having a lot of guys come in for that recruiting weekend, and next weekend when Indiana plays Ohio State, won't be quite as good. It will still be a lot of kids there. It still will be a huge recruiting piece for them, but it does create a recruiting disadvantage. Even in the Big Ten, it creates a recruiting disadvantage because Oregon, your big games, you're probably going to get at night. You're probably going to get in that NBC slot. Everyone else, you're probably going to get at the Fox slot, and that kind of puts you in a weird spot where Oregon, not only are they probably pushing the biggest check around, but at the end of the day, they also are getting the best slots for them to have those recruiting weekends, and all of this is a little bit ticky-tacky, I understand that, but it absolutely can have different effects on this team, on different programs, and definitely can be one of those things that really hurts you in the long run overall, and could hurt this conference in the long run if they are really that mad about this Fox setup. So going to be interesting to watch, but the big question here is who's at fault for all this? There's that Colorado-Utah picture I was looking for, but who's at fault for all this is a pretty easy answer. I'll be totally honest with you. There are a lot of people mad at Fox. There's a lot of people putting anger towards Joel Klatt, putting anger towards Gus Johnson, all of the people over there. You're probably wrong to do that. This media deal was very, very specific. When the Big Ten signed it a couple of years ago, when Kevin Warren and all of his guys signed it, he's no longer there for obvious reasons. But the way that it's set up is Fox, you get the noon slot. CBS, you get the 3:30 slot. NBC, you get the 7:30 slot. That is the way it works. No matter what, no matter the week, and it does not change. And Fox tends to get the first choice every single week. So that's the reality of the situation. If you're Fox and you cannot move out of the noon slot, you're not just going to take the inferior game so everyone gets that night game. You're not just going to take, Purdue, Wisconsin so that Ohio State, Penn State can be on a totally different channel and they can get all the riches from that. So they're doing exactly what everyone else would do. They're doing exactly what everyone else would do in their scenario where you just got to take the best game, whether it's at noon, because a lot of the sentiment out there has been, we know that you'll put it at noon because we'll watch either way. Exactly. They're going to have to pick the best game because they know you're going to watch, they know that you're going to turn it on, and they need that money, and they feel like they deserve that money. So while I understand being upset at Fox, I totally get it. I totally get being understand, and somewhat the product has been a little bit lackluster this year. I totally understand that. But at the end of the day, it's a lot of just the decision makers at the Big Ten putting themselves in a position where the contract that you signed almost guarantees that you're going to have noon games that are the biggest games of the weekend. So I think it's kind of Kevin Warren's fault. I think it's kind of the Big Ten office's fault, and Tony Petitti has a chance to kind of right the ship just a little bit here. It's going to be really hard to do, no doubt about that. But the other part of this that people that are kind of at fault that goes beyond the league offices, it's just the teams. Sometimes the teams just aren't good enough. The dichotomy in the Big Ten is very, very clear and has been clear for really the last decade. It's been Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, and everyone else. And now Oregon has jumped into that mix. Obviously, Indiana trying to build up into that mix. But that's the reality of this conference. It is those couple of teams up top, and then pretty much no one else. No disrespect to Illinois, no disrespect to Minnesota or Rutgers or Purdue or all of these teams. They're great teams. They're not great brands. That's just the reality of the situation. So you look at the SEC, even last week, you had Ole Miss, Georgia at 3:30, and then you had Bama, LSU. You had two matchups that were massive for the CFP, that always were going to be massive. And then in the Big Ten this year, it's been, okay, we got Oregon, Ohio State. Then you wait a couple of weeks. Okay, we got Penn State, Ohio State. Then you wait a couple of weeks. Okay, we got Ohio State, Indiana. Then we'll get Ohio State, Michigan. But that game's not even huge this year. So you're putting yourself in a position where, yes, Fox is going to take the very best game of the week because that's the only place they can take it. They can only be at noon. That's the way the media contract works. And frankly, they're not going to take Minnesota, Illinois just so everyone else can see that a game at night. That's just never going to happen. So what does need to happen is they need to rethink this thing one way or the other. They need to find a way to move forward and sort of quote-unquote fix it, I suppose. And I think the best way to do it is really just have the TV networks rotate slots throughout the year, whether that's Fox moving to 7 p.m. one week and NBC taking the noon slot or vice versa and playing around with that a little bit. I think CBS would probably like to stay at 3:30, but who knows? Maybe there's a little bit of wiggle room there. Allow teams to rotate the first choice. Allow NBC to sometimes get the first choice of what game they're going to broadcast, not just Fox every week, because if you are going to stay at noon for Fox, then we should rotate around that a little bit because this is the only reality we have right about now. And then make a benchmark for night games for the teams in each conference, or especially in the Big Ten, because you have an Ohio State team. They're going to play, I think, 8 or 9 noon games. That's not a team that should play 8 or 9 noon games. I understand most fans, and I'm 100% sure that Ryan Day and those players don't much care when they play. But at the end of the day, it does matter. It is a big deal for this conference. It is a big deal for all of these different schools and a lot of the recruiting ability for these schools. So it sounds like a tedious thing. It sounds like something that you shouldn't be yelling at. It sounds like something that it's kind of old men yelling at the cloud type of problems, obviously. But when you look at the Big Ten, you have the whiteout. You have one of the best atmospheres in all of the sport. You have one of those things that every time you watch it, it is always really special to watch. other than this year. It just really wasn't fun to watch. It didn't feel like you were watching the whiteout. It didn't feel like a special moment in college football. And that's just wrong. So whatever you need to do to fix that, whether it's making sure that Fox gets a couple of night slots throughout the year, or it just means rotating the choices for all of these networks every single week. Obviously, at the end of all this, the same thing we talk about pretty much every time we talk about a change in college football is the reality is the people making the decisions, the people at those media companies, at CBS, at NBC, at Fox, would have to just say, let's forego some money for this to happen. They would have to say, let's just say the fans are more important than our pocketbooks. And let's be honest, they don't do that very often. So I wouldn't necessarily hold your breath here. I wouldn't necessarily, if you're a Penn State fan, I wouldn't necessarily expect anything different next year when you play Ohio State. But Tony Petitti has a shot here. Get on the phone with CBS, NBC, Fox, and just see what they say. Maybe they'll laugh you off the phone and hang up. Maybe they'll say, that's crazy. There's no way we're giving up the agreement that we have. I don't know, maybe the goodness of people's hearts will come through. But the reality is, it does need to be fixed, whether it's this year or next year or the year after that. They need to find a way to get Ohio State, Penn State at night with the whiteout happening, because that's what college football is. We can't just have all of the night games, all of the marquee night games at the very least, be that LSU, Alabama, be the Tennessee, Georgia, be all the games in the SEC, because then it's going to reinforce what the SEC already is, which is kind of pulling away from a lot of different people. So it's going to be interesting to watch all of this unfold, and obviously hope to see more night games in the Big Ten coming forward, at least more elite night games coming forward. And that's the job of a lot of people. It's the job of Tony Petitti. It's the job of the media companies. It's the job of the teams themselves, just playing a little bit better football. But at the end of the day, we'll see what happens in the next coming years, and I'm sure one way or another, we will still have a couple of Penn State and Ohio State fans none too happy with Fox. But we'll figure it out in time, and we'll take our second break here. And when we come back, we got to break down a couple of big-time games this upcoming weekend. I think Oregon at Wisconsin is a little bit of a sketchy spot for Oregon. And then South Carolina, Missouri, technically an elimination game in the CFP, but could outright be not important. But I'll break it down right after this.